Yeah. So good evening, friends. And as you know, we are going to start with our 500 plus program for GS. So the first three topics are on geography that is there in your paper one. So that is what we are going to discuss. We'll look into how essentially we'll be preparing. So if we talk about the 500 plus program, I already run a 500 plus program for my geography optional. And on similar lines, what I have done, I have started this 500 plus program also for the GS. And it is a program designed to ease your preparation, to make sure that you are able to prepare the for the mains 2023 in a timely manner, in a very focused manner. And we are even able to deal with various type of questions which are being asked in the examination. So my today's lecture, if you talk about it, it is divided into two parts. In the first part, we'll look into the nature of geography questions which have been asked from this part of paper one. And if you talk about in the next part, we'll essentially look into some of the questions, some of the topics which I have chosen for the discussion. So first, very important thing is we have to understand what is the focus of this 500 plus. We want to prioritize, we want to focus upon 500 themes and 500 themes and questions which essentially have very high ROI. So the returns here, if we invest time here, there are greater chances that these type of questions will be coming directly, or on similar lines questions would be asked in the examination. So that is one thing. But also in this program, we are taking care of the fact that the things which are in news related with those topics, the traditional part, we also revise through this program. Okay, because you must be aware that if you've seen the previous year questions, one thing is very clear, there is an increase in weightage towards the traditional part. Even the current questions which they are asking, they are essentially more, if you talk about focusing upon the traditional themes which are to be studied. So that is what we are going to do. And so since here we are talking about geography, so let us little bit look into the nature of geography. So if we talk about geography, one thing has to be understood very well, that when we are talking about geography, geography is in essentially a spatial science. So when we are talking about spatial science, it is study of distribution of phenomena, various types of phenomena like physical phenomena and the human phenomena, how they are distributed in space. What is the pattern of the distribution and what are the causes of such kind of distribution. Also in recent times, geography has become highly applied discipline where if we also look into the associated problems and the solutions, that is an area which can give us an edge over the others. So however, one thing we have to remember that it is a spatial science. That means if we are able to draw good amount of locational aspects, diagrams like maps, etc., that is going to fetch us very good marks. Okay, that is one thing we have to remember. Also, geography is an integrative science. Basically, the focus of geography, if you talk about, is on the human and environment relationship. So even if, suppose for example, we are talking about questions of physical geography, and in the later part, like in the conclusion part, if we can link it with some human phenomena, that is going to work wonders for us. It will tell the examiner that we are aware that geography is essentially an integrative science and we are taking care of that integration, we are taking care of that human and environment relationship. So these things you have to remember. So generally what happens, if you talk about in our answers, what should be there? The introduction, if you talk about, introduction will again be determined by the nature of the question which is there. So variety of type of introductions can be written. For example, we can write about what is essentially the phenomena. So what can be one type of introduction which is a kind of static introduction. Also, there can be why, which is more dynamic. For example, whenever I see a question, I ask myself a question. Why this question has been asked? What is essentially the relevance of this question? And if I'm able to answer this, I get my introduction. So this is a very powerful way of producing the introduction, very relevant introductions in very fast manner. So same thing also you can practice. If nothing suppose comes to mind, essentially what we can do, we can definitely write about the what, the definition, etc. of the phenomena which has essentially been asked. Also, we can go for some kind of historical events which would have led to that phenomena. So that is also one of the ways we can introduce our geographical answers. Then if you talk about the main body, as you can understand, the main body will be dependent upon the keywords which are being asked in the question. So if you talk about the keywords, remember that keywords are of two types. In any question, there are two types of keywords. One category of keywords, I call them as the primary keyword. And the second type is referred to as the secondary keyword. So if you talk about the primary keyword, like if I just take some of the questions like which here I have taken up, like see here, there is one question, examine why earthquakes occur and explain the various kind of waves produced in an earthquake. Or take other question, examine the vulnerability of India to earthquakes and propose a short, medium and long term solution to alleviate the risk associated with it. So if I look into here, if I suppose take this first statement, examine the vulnerability of India to earthquakes. So here my primary keyword is vulnerability of India to earthquakes. So this is my primary keyword. What is essentially the secondary keyword? Secondary keyword here is examine. It is the secondary keyword. So I always advise my students, use always pen when you are reading your question paper. And in the question paper, what you do, you highlight. You can even write, this is the primary keyword and this is the secondary keyword. I can write P and S. Okay. So that you don't forget. Why we are doing so? Because remember what primary keyword gives to us. Primary keyword will tell me the headings of the paragraphs. It will give me the headings of the paragraph. So for example, if it is asking about the vulnerability of India to landslide, can we say vulnerability of India can be divided into three types of vulnerability: high, medium and low. In fact, I can divide it also into four types: very high, medium, or very high, high, medium and low vulnerability. So that primary keyword is giving me what? It is giving me the headings of the answer, the main body, the paragraphs which will be written. What is the role of secondary keyword? Secondary keyword essentially gives me, or it tells me how to write within the paragraphs. Okay. So it is explaining me how to write within the paragraphs. So you must be aware that if you talk about the secondary keywords, there can be variety of type of secondary keywords. Like for example, category 1 type of keywords, here the focus is more on description of the phenomenon. Okay, so for example, keywords like what, where, highlight, etc. They will tell me about that I have to basically do what? Describe the phenomenon. So within the paragraph, if such keywords are used, I will be describing the phenomenon. But if there is a second category keyword, here along with description, the focus becomes explanation. Explanation of the phenomenon. So if I talk about explanation of the phenomena, number of type of keywords like you can understand why, how, explain, elaborate, illustrate. So such category of the keywords, they are essentially telling me that I have to focus upon why of the phenomenon. Particularly the elaborate and illustrate, if you talk about, these are explanation with the help of some examples, with the help of some case studies, diagrams. So that is what is the meaning of these terms, elaborate and illustrate. So that is a second category of the keyword. Third category keywords, if you talk about, they become more challenging. So here what is happening, along with the why of the phenomena, you also have to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the phenomenon. So, for example, here if I am writing about the advantages, I'll give more weightage to the advantage. So here advantage will be, the pros phenomena will be at least 60 to, I would say 60 to 70% it can be. While disadvantage, it can vary from 30 to 40%. So here the difficulty level of the keywords increases. So number of type of keywords can be asked, like for example, if we talk about analyze, discuss, examine. So such type of keywords are the category 3 keywords. Category 4 keywords, if you talk about, are the ones which if we look into here, again this it is same thing. You have to write about what and why plus the advantage and disadvantages of the phenomena or negatives of the phenomena which is associated. However, here the critical element becomes higher. Okay, so here the disadvantage will be between 50 to 60%. So this part becomes higher. Okay, so when you are writing the paragraph, the focus should be on writing the critical element of the phenomena. So if you talk about, like for example, you might have seen critical analysis, critically examine, write a critique. So this is the category 4 keyword where the difficulty level further increases. In between these two, between this 4 and between this 3, there is another category of keywords which there is a little bit of freedom available to you, which you can choose. So keywords like comment, give your views. Here there is little bit of freedom. You can write according to your choice. You can write more in favor or against the question or against the topic which has been asked. So there is little bit of freedom. I can choose whether I will be writing more against it or more for it. Although being aspirant of civil services, you have to make sure that you follow a balanced approach. So in such type of questions, an ideal share between the pros and cons should be 50-50. Okay. So these type of, if you talk about the keywords, they are the secondary keywords. So secondary keywords will tell me how to write the content within the paragraph. So if we are following this kind of methodology, essentially what it will do, it will help you out, and it will generate very good answers. Okay. So that is something which we will be trying to do. Then if you talk about the last part, that is the conclusions. I would say conclusions, you can have already ready-made conclusions, because again, if you have written a good main body, essentially what will happen, you will be finding that the conclusions won't too much matter, but you have to write, because that is a part and parcel of answers. So you have to think very quickly. You have to remember that you have to write 20 questions in the examination. So you have to think very fast. You cannot waste time in thinking too much about the introductions and conclusions. So conclusions, you can have some kind of ready-made linkages, like in geography. If you talk about, we can links always with phenomena like global warming, climate change, environmental degradation, in recent times the COVID-19. Okay, so there can be some kind of ready-made linkages which we can have already with the topics which are mentioned in the syllabus, and definitely that can be a good conclusion. So that is the first part of answer writing. Second is, since we are talking here about geography, so let us look into the syllabus which is given in paper 1 of GS of geography. So you can see that there are 3 topics which are given in the syllabus. So first topic, it simply says salient features of world physical geography. So salient features of world physical geography. So you can very clearly understand, when I'm talking about the salient feature of world physical geography, it is essentially physical geography. The word world here, it essentially means that whatever phenomena you are reading, you should have examples from real world. So you should have already got those examples which you should be using to support whatever you are writing. So that is the salient features of world physical geography. Then if you talk about a related phenomena with this world physical geography, is the important geophysical phenomena. So another topic has been separately mentioned. So important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, cyclones, etc., geographical features and their location changes in critical geographical features, including water bodies, ice caps, in flora and fauna, and the effects of such changes. So this is another topic which is mentioned in the syllabus. Third topic which is mentioned in the syllabus is more related with human geography, human economic geography. So it talks about the distribution of key natural resources across world, including South Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Second topic within this which is mentioned is factors responsible for the location of primary, secondary and tertiary sector industries in various parts of the world, including India. Okay, so if we look into these 3 topics, and if we look from these 3 topics perspective into the previous year questions, we will be finding one of the area where maximum number of questions have been asked is this 2. So it is number 1 in terms of the number of questions which has been asked. Then if you talk about the second most important area, has been this, where they are asking about several critical features. In fact, these critical features, if you talk about several geophysical phenomena, this is the area where they are essentially asking lots of current affair based questions. So the phenomena which have been in news, so this is the area where they are asking. So in priority of our classes, this is number 2. Then comes this salient features of world physical geography. You can understand studying the entire world physical geography and preparing it, it actually will require lots of time. And this is not the purpose of these classes, because these are fast track if you talk about revision classes and updation classes. So here we will take some questions which have been also in news, some traditional topics, because of certain reasons they have been in news. For example, there was a news in very recent times about the coastal erosion which is taking place along the coast of Odisha. So it is becoming a problematic issue. So if I think about geomorphology topic, there is a topic of coastal erosion, coastal landforms. So there I should be aware about the phenomena which are taking place, and again, what are the problems associated with it, how to tackle this. So that is something I can link it with. So likewise, what we will be doing, we will be talking about. So suppose there was other type of news like cyclones are always in news. There was a report, in fact, a recent report has come up which talks about that in the North Indian Ocean, the pattern of the cyclones has changed, both in the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. So again, that is something which I should know, and that means I will not just study the news item, I will also revise the basics of the cyclone. Okay, so likewise, there is lots of overlapping between this first and this third. In fact, you can understand when I will be taking this third topic, this has also lots of overlapping with your paper 3. And if you talk about the paper 3, it has overlapping with some parts of your environment and ecology. It has overlapping with part of your disaster management topic. Okay, disasters and disaster management. So some things related with that we will take here also when we are dealing with the geography topics of paper 1. Okay, so that is going to be our methodology, that is going to be our method. As I have told you in the orientation classes, remember that preparing geography well is very, very crucial to score high marks in paper 1. Because if we look into geography, the nature of geography, it is geography only where the more objective type of questions are being asked in paper 1. And it is this area where we can be very sure to get marks depending upon our performance, and we can be sure that we'll get good marks. Because if you look into the questions which have been asked in history, if you look into the questions which have been asked in society, there is more subjectivity associated. So there can be different interpretation of the questions. So even if I feel like I have written very good answer, it might not be so for the examiner. But in case of geography, geography is more like a science, more like objective. So here what I will be writing, if I have written the correct thing, it is the same thing which the examiner will also have in his mind, in his model answer. So the chances of the matching of my answer with the model answer will be high. And since if we look into the weightage which has been given to geography in recent times, so the weightage has been of average, I am talking about 100 marks. In fact, in last 2 years, it has been more than 100. So even if we take the average of 100 marks, it is very much clear that if I am able to secure minimum 50% of marks, I am taking the lower side, 50% of the marks I have to score here. And if I am able to do so, that means I have already scored 50 marks. Now the rest of the marks which are left, which includes the part of your history and Indian society of paper 1, they contribute 150 marks together. Average in recent times, if we look into, it is 75 and 75 marks. Now what I have to do, I have to make sure that minimum, again, I get out of this 150, I score 50, or I can say 50 plus. So if I am able to do so, here also we can say 50 plus should be our target. Here we can be sure if we prepare well, we'll be able to score that 50 plus. So if we can do so, that means our score can easily go beyond 100 plus. That is what we require. Okay, so that is the significance of this topic of geography. So what we are going to do now is we are going to start with the discussion of the questions which are there, which I have chosen, the topics and the questions related with them, which have been in news for some or the other reason, and we'll look into all the things, all the basics of that. You'll understand the methodology which I'm going to take up. So first topic which I'm going to start with is the important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, cyclone, etc., geographical features and locational changes in critical geographical features. So this is, as I told you, an area where lots of questions are being asked. Okay, so today I am going to take some of these topics more related with the geomorphology part, like we'll talk about the earthquakes, we'll talk about landslides, land sinking, tsunami. So these topics we are going to take up for today. Okay. So see what is going to be my methodology. In the first few minutes of each and every topic, I will make you revise the basics. And then we will look into some of the questions and the news events which have cropped up in recent times. And then we'll look into how essentially to answer them. Okay. So if I look into earthquakes, so you know it is the traditional topic of geography, physical geography, geomorphology in particular. And you must have studied about it. So if I just very quickly make you revise. So we should know what is an earthquake. So earthquake is essentially what it is, the shaking of the earth crust. When this shaking takes place, it is result of release of enormous amount of energy in a very short period of time. Why this energy can be released? It can be released because of number of causes. The most important cause, as you know, is the tectonic events. It is more related with the plate tectonics. Okay, so that is basically what is an earthquake. So it is shaking or the trembling of the earth's crust. And as I told you, it is more related with the tectonics, where there is faulting in the rocks, breaking of the rocks taking place, and movement along that fault line is taking place. That is basically what is an earthquake. So if we look into the causes, why that we are saying that it is what we said here, that what it is shaking of the earth crust due to release of enormous amount of energy which is generating seismic waves which travel in all directions. And why this, now the question arises, why this energy can be released? So this energy can be released because of number of factors. You can understand, we can talk about, it can be related with natural phenomena, it can be related with human phenomena, anthropogenic causes. So if you talk about, first, it can be related with the movement of the plates. So you know plate tectonics, and you know plate tectonics, majority of the earthquakes are taking place along the plate boundaries. So it can be related with the movement which is taking place along the plate boundaries. As you know, there are very commonly taking place along the convergent boundaries. They are also sometimes they are taking place along the transform boundaries, and sometimes they can also take place along the divergent boundaries. So that is one of the major causes of the earthquakes, majority of the earthquakes which are taking place. It can also be related with volcanism. So you know volcanic events can be many times can erupt, volcanoes can erupt with lots of explosiveness, and that explosiveness can release enormous amount of energy suddenly, and that can again lead to that breaking of the rocks and that generation of earthquake waves which would cause that shaking of the earth's crust. So volcanism, it can also be result of landslides. So you can understand that if very fast landslide is taking place, lots of material going at very fast rate, so it will hit the ground, and ultimately again that kinetic energy, the velocity which was there, it would be released, and what will be happening, there can again be shaking of the earth. Then it can be related with isostasy. Isostasy, you know, it is essentially the balance of the lithosphere with the mantle. So it is like a boat which is floating in water. So if you disturb the boat, if the lithosphere is disturbed, it would shake, like the boat will shake. So that can be one of the natural cause. Also, it can be related with meteorite impact. So you know, if a meteorite comes and hit the surface, the same thing which was happening in the landslide, it would release enormous amount of energy, and that can again lead to the shaking of the earth. So again, that is the natural cause. Anthropogenic causes, it can be, we know that earthquakes are also created because of human activities. So one of the very common ways is reservoir induced seismicity or earthquakes. Like if you talk about in India, Koina earthquake of Maharashtra has a very good example. So essentially what we find, if you are impounding water, enormous amount of weight is being put on the rocks. There is a chance that if the rocks are weaker, they will fracture, they will fault, they will be faulting, they'll break. And when they break, essentially what will happen, enormous amount of energy will be released, and that will lead to the earthquake. Similarly, if you talk about when there are nuclear explosions being done, that would also lead to, that also has the potential to generate huge amount of energy. Huge amount of energy is released. So that will also generate the earthquakes. In fact, you can understand कि जब some countries are doing nuclear explosion, how other countries are able to know that? Because the seismic stations would record these seismic waves, and they will know that there was such kind of explosion. So that is also there. Some other type of activities like human activities like mining can also generate earthquake. So for example, when you are in underground mines, suppose there is collapse of the roof of the mine, then also lots of energy will be released and earthquakes can be caused. So that is the case. Then we should know a little bit about the type of earthquakes. So there are 3 types of earthquakes according to plate tectonics, depending upon where the focus of the earthquake is. What is essentially the focus? Where that fracture was taking place, from where the energy was essentially released. So what is the depth of the focus? According to it, there are 3 types of earthquakes. So shallow focus earthquake, you must be knowing, it is also written in NCERT, 0 to 70 kilometer depth. If the focus is lying, that is shallow focus earthquake. If it is intermediate focus, between 70 to 300 kilometers depth, if the focus is lying, that is intermediate focus earthquakes. Deep focus earthquakes are the ones where if you talk about from 300 to almost 690, or you can average it out to 700 kilometers depth, the focus is lying. So according to plate tectonics, there are 3 such type of earthquakes which can take place. So shallow focus, intermediate focus and deep focus earthquakes. If we look into the distribution of the most of the seismicity, earthquake activity which is taking place around the world, it becomes very much clear, amply clear, that most of the activity is taking place where? It is taking place along the plate margins. So these are the plate boundaries. Like you can see the Pacific boundary, which is also, it is also referred to as ring of fire, because it is essentially a subduction zone boundary where there is lots of volcanism also taking place. So you can see that here it is one area. Then one belt of earthquake, you can see it is associated with the mid-oceanic ridges. So mid-oceanic ridges, mid-oceanic ridges are, there are small segments of mid-oceanic ridges which are connected to each other through transform faults. Faults where the plates are sliding past each other. So when they are sliding past each other, there can be the rough edges can get interlocked, and that can lead to breaking of the rocks, and that can generate earthquake. So there also you will find that there can be earthquakes. Also, because these are divergent boundaries, sometimes it can also be generated because of the volcanism, although such type of earthquakes are not very strong. Okay, so these are the major zones where they are taking place. You can also see other zones, like for example, you can see from here Mediterranean, there is another boundary which is the mid-continental boundary. It enters into the Himalayas and towards the Tibetan plateau. So these are the major areas where we find majority of the earthquakes are taking place. Other earthquakes can take place in the intraplate region, and they can be associated with number of phenomena like the hotspot, volcanism, or other type of activities that can generate such earthquakes. So that is the world distribution of earthquake, I should be aware. Then there can be, if you talk about India, in India also earthquakes are taking place, and on the basis of the earthquake occurrence and the destruction which it causes, the intensity, we can divide India into number of these zones. So There is zone 2, which is the safe zone, which is basically the old plateau, the shield areas, core of those areas. So that is zone 1, zone 2. And beyond this lies the zone 3. So zone 3 are the areas where there is presence of fault lines. Like for example, you know that here there is the Narmada Tapi fault line. Here there is Mahanadi. Here if you talk about, there is Damodar fault. Similarly, here there is Godavari fault line. Here, if you talk about, there are faults associated with Western Ghats. So again, we find that these are the areas in zone 3 where there is some chances of occurring earthquakes, and there is some intensity of earthquakes can take place. But as we go towards the zone 4 and 5, these are the core zone. These are the epicenters of the earthquakes. So, you know, directly above the focus is location of the epicenter. So these are the zones. Zone 5 is essentially, these red ones are the places which are located at the places where there is higher chance of the occurrence of earthquakes. Okay. So there, that are marked in red, where there is maximum intensity, maximum damage is being caused by the earthquakes. Similarly, zone 4 are the areas which are surrounding the zone 5, because as you go away from the epicenter, what happens? The intensity of the earthquake declines. So that is why they are essentially the zone 4 of the earthquake. So this is how the distribution of the earthquakes is there. So, you know, here in case of India, there is places like, here there are fault lines, like there is one fault line which runs through here. It is referred to as main central thrust. Then there is another fault line which runs through, which is referred to as MBT, main boundary thrust. In recent times, a third, which is HFF, Himalayan front fault. So there are several such fault lines where the movement of plates is taking place, rocks is taking place, and sometimes they can be stuck into each other, and that can generate the earthquakes. Okay, so here that is the cause. Similarly, you can see one more zone 5 is there in India. It is related with the Kutch region. Alaband fault is located here. So again, there is a very active movement taking place there. So that is one area where severe earthquakes can take place. Same thing, Andaman Nicobar, it is very much near to the convergence zone, the subduction zone. So again, there also zone 5, it is also an area of earthquake activity. So accordingly, what we have done, we have divided India into these intensity zones. Okay. So, you know, several effects of earthquakes can be there: ground shaking, differential ground settlement. It can generate landslides, mudslides, fires can be there. So number of effects can be there of the earthquake. Then if you look into the past year question, like 2022 का अगर हम question देखें, तो one of the questions which was asked was on volcanism, and they also asked you one very specific thing: what were the recent volcanic events? List down the recent volcanic events. So you had to list down those events, and many of the students were not knowing the recent volcanic events which had taken place. So when we are preparing for particularly these geophysical phenomena, we should be well aware of the recent such events which have taken place, particularly in the past few years. So for example, here I have given you earthquakes are a very common phenomenon. Okay, so because of them being a very common phenomena, there have been many earthquakes which have occurred in 2023 itself. So here I have given you a list of earthquakes which have occurred. This is on the basis of magnitude. So you know, one of the earthquake which occurred, a very devastating earthquake which occurred in Turkey with a magnitude of 7.8. In fact, you know, because of this event, earthquakes has been in news, and that is why this has become the topic of our discussion. Okay, then there were others, so you can just go through it because the slides will be given to you. So at least you can remember 3-4 names. Okay, so that is there. In fact, on the basis of the destruction which was caused in terms of, for example, death toll, you can see some of the earthquakes are mentioned. So for example, almost 60,000 people lost their life in the Turkish earthquake, which is very, very, if you talk about very, very kind of extreme phenomena. And one of the reasons, you can see the depth of the focus was very near to the surface. Others, like for example, there was Afghanistan in production. It took place with 6.5 Richter scale. But can you see the focus, depth of the focus? It was essentially an intermediate focus earthquake. And always remember, shallow focus earthquakes are more destructive. We'll talk about that. So essentially, thus you can see the destruction was not so much high. Then there were others where there has been some destruction, some loss of lives. So at least these 4, 5 you can remember, so that if such a question is asked, you are essentially able to answer it. So I have taken some of the questions here which we can discuss. So first is examine why earthquakes occur. So explain why, examine why earthquakes are occurring. Explain the various kinds of waves produced in an earthquake. So again, I can start my answer here with an quick introduction. So again, remember introduction दो तरीके के हो सकते हैं. यहाँ पर one, what, where I can give the definition of the earthquake which we just now saw. That can be one introduction we could have given, or we could have thought, जो मैंने बोला था कि ये क्वेश्चन क्यों पूछा गया, why this question has been asked. So just now we saw why this question was asked. Why I have framed this question? Because it was in news. Why it was in news? Because of the devastating earthquake in Turkey. So I can start my introduction with the relevance. I can talk about the Turkish earthquake which occurred. That can be one of the introduction. You can choose this, whatever introduction you have to write. Then coming to the main body of the answer, you can see there are two parts. One is examine and other is explain the various kinds of waves. We have seen, if you remember, अभी हमने देखा था, explain is a second category keyword. Examine is basically what? It is a third category keyword. That means if you talk about, it should carry more weightage. So if my question is telling me to examine in one part and explain in the other part, can I say I will give little bit more weightage to the first part? Because here the keyword is examine. So if I have to write the main body, I'll give to the first part 60% of the weightage, and to the second part 40% of the weightage I will be giving in terms of the words I will be writing. So examine why earthquakes occur. So we have seen already, we just now talked about why earthquakes occur. So in the main body, as we said, the one thing is why earthquakes occur. So just now we talked about the causes of the earthquake, and you should tell here with examples, some of the recent examples which have taken place. You should talk about the natural causes and the human made causes of the earthquakes. So this was the first part, because we have already just revised it, so I will not deliberate it on here. Then that is the first part which will carry 60%, because the question was talking about examination. Okay, examination. So I will talk also about little bit here. I will elaborate with essentially with the help of the plate tectonics. I'll talk about that. Although we know much about the earthquakes, okay, so little bit of the critical part I will add. Here there is not too much of critical part to write. Sometimes when we are like examiners, when we are making questions, we do not think too much and we just sometimes put that keyword. So यहाँ पर like I put examine as the keyword, but it does not mean कि वहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा मेरे को criticism लिखने के लिए, because it is talking about why they are, and we know already the science is there. Okay, but we can talk about how little bit how the, despite the plate tectonics theory explaining it, how there is several things, several unknown reasons of the earthquakes. ठीक है, So if I just talk about this unknown reasons of the earthquakes, when it comes to earthquakes, as we talked about the shallow focus and the intermediate focus earthquakes, scientists today know with certainty that these are associated with a phenomena referred to as elastic rebound. A phenomena which is referred to as elastic rebound. Elastic rebound क्या होता है? अगर मैं किसी stick को लूं, suppose if I take a stick and if I bend that stick, what will happen? It will bend, and if it is bending, where is that energy which I was putting on that stick? It is getting stored in the stick. Law of physics, energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. So that energy is not going nowhere. It is being stored in the stick as stress energy. Suddenly when that energy becomes higher than the strength of the stick, what will happen? वो stick टूट जाएगी, और जब वो टूटती है तो you might have seen कि एक झटका सा लगता है हाथ को. तो सेम थिंग हैपन्स हियर. वो झटका क्यों लगता है? क्योंकि वो जो एनर्जी स्टोर हुई थी स्टिक में वो सडनली रिलीज हो गई, इसलिए वो झटका लग रहा है. तो सेम थिंग रॉक्स में होता है. तो रॉक्स में भी एसेंशियली क्या हो रहा है कि देयर इज, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट व्हेन देयर इज रॉक्स आर बेंडिंग एंड दे ब्रेक, enormous amount of energy suddenly will be released. Okay, so that is essentially causing the earthquake. So here we know shallow focus earthquake, intermediate focus earthquakes इसी कारण से हो रहे हैं, because the rocks essentially break and suddenly that energy is released. Scientists through the laboratory experiments now even know that even up to the depth of 300 kilometers, the rocks which are subsiding, they can remain strong enough, they can remain rigid enough to break. Okay, like the brittle, something brittle breaking up. So we know about this. What we don't know about the earthquakes? We don't know about the third, that is the deep focus earthquakes. So we are not aware about them. There are number of viewpoints, number of hypotheses of how these earthquakes are taking place, but our knowledge about them is very limited. Okay, so that is one area where I can write that shortcoming. Examine इसलिए मैंने डाला वहां पर, so that you can write here this shortcoming, that our knowledge about the deep focus earthquakes is essentially limited. Okay, so that completes, if I am writing this, this will complete my first part, where I am giving how much of the weightage? 60% of the weightage to the answer. Then the second part is saying, explain the various kinds of waves which are produced in an earthquake. So you should know, this is a more traditional part. So we know that when earthquakes are taking place, energy is moving in the form of earthquake waves. These earthquake waves, we call them as the seismic waves. Okay, and essentially seismic waves are of two types. One is the body waves, and the second one, if you talk about, is the surface waves. You know that body waves are also of two types, primary, or simply we call them as the P waves, and secondary, that is the S waves. If you talk about the surface waves, they are also of two types, love or the L waves and Rayleigh waves, R waves. So four type of waves are generated. Because the question is talking about explain, here there is explanation. ठीक है, तो अब मैं इसको दो तरीके से लिख सकता हूं, या तो हर के ऊपर एक एक पैराग्राफ लिख दूं, दैट इज वन वे, या फिर मैं अपना टाइम और स्पेस बचाने के लिए क्या कर सकता हूं, आई कैन एसेंशियली मेक अ चार्ट. So I can talk about the type of waves and their characteristics. And here, as we said, body waves and the surface waves. And here you have to make sure you are not writing too much, just what is their characteristic. Like for example, I write P waves, they are longitudinal waves which are fastest. Finish. इससे ज़्यादा लिखने की ज़रूरत नहीं. ठीक है. Same thing, secondary waves, they are transverse waves which arrive after the P waves. So that is enough. इससे ज़्यादा we don't need to write it. So ultimately, our main body with this will be finished. We will reach to the conclusion, and you can understand जो अभी हमने बात की conclusion can be, it is although a physical geography question, but क्या मैं इसको relate कर सकता हूँ human से, human phenomena से? Yes, कर सकता हूँ. Can I say कि it is very important for us because every year or very frequently what we see, number of lives are lost. Earthquakes cause very much damage. Lots of damage is being caused by the earthquakes. Okay, so essentially on this line we can write something, since every year or very frequently earthquakes cause lots of damage, it is important to further our research on the causes of their occurrence so that we can develop early warning systems to minimize the damage caused by them. So see what I have done. It was a physical geography question, but I linked it with the human phenomena. So this, if I am able to do, it will definitely be rewarded by the examiner. Okay, so let us move on. Question number 2, examine the vulnerability of India to earthquake and propose short, medium and long term measures, in fact it should be, to alleviate risks associated with it. So examine the vulnerability of India to earthquakes. This is the first part. So again I will start with an introduction. See, one thing you have to understand, whenever I see the copies of many of the students, they are still in the traditional mode. And what is that traditional mode? You people are writing too much long introduction. You have to make sure that your introductions are very short, because how many words you are writing? You are writing 150 words, you are writing 250 words. In so much less words, you can understand. Main body is the most important thing which is fetching you marks. Okay, maximum marks is fetched by the main body. If you write too much long introduction, what will happen? You will have less space to write the main body. Even if suppose examiner is not punishing you for overwriting, then also you will lose time if you are overwriting, if you are exceeding the word limit. So word limit is also the time limit. So make sure that the introduction is just 10% of the words. That means if it is 150 words, 15 words introduction. If it is 250 words, answer 25 words introduction should be written. Okay, so here the question is about the vulnerability of India to earthquakes. Definitely I can talk about the vulnerability. So I would simply say something like this: vulnerability to earthquakes is function of, so I can write what are the factors on which the vulnerability would depend. So vulnerability would depend upon what? It would depend upon the distance from the epicenters of the earthquakes. It also depends upon the rock structure. It also depends upon the land use and association with other hazards. So for example, earthquake can trigger other hazards. Earthquakes, for example, if they are occurring in Himalayas, tell me, can they trigger landslides? They can cause more destruction, more devastating they can become. Okay. So again, I've just written a very relevant introduction. So coming to the main body, again I'll read, examine the vulnerability of India to earthquakes. So I would say here, depending upon these factors, India has been divided into earthquake intensity zones. Earthquake intensity zones. अभी हमने देखा था earthquake intensity zone map. ठीक है. So what I will do, I will draw here on half of the page. I will draw half of, मतलब अगर मेरे पास ये पेज है तो ये जो स्पेस में लिखना है तो मैं यहां पर इंडिया का मैप, जो वल्नरेबिलिटी मैप, ठीक है. सो हियर इट शुड बी द इंटेंसिटी map which tells us about the vulnerability of India to earthquakes. Okay, so if you talk about here, I will little bit explain, like for example, I know कि सबसे high vulnerability कहाँ पर है, it is in zone 5, and why this area is having high vulnerability, I can name which are the areas where there is this much of vulnerability is there, because ultimately these are the like areas like Kashmir Valley, other areas like the Kullu Manali region, other areas like if you talk about Uttar Kashi region of Uttarakhand, entire northeast India, northern Bihar, Kutch Peninsula of India, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands of India. So again, because the question was examined, little bit explanation करना है, ठीक है. So हमें पता है why these are so much high vulnerability zone, because these are the epicenters which are located over the fault lines, active fault lines, ठीक है. So active fault lines पर located है, which are your MCT and MBT, ठीक है. Northeast, why entire northeast is considered as in zone 5? Because we know that our peninsula, it is attached with Asia. So you must have studied when it was going and attaching, it was taking an anti-clockwise turn, ठीक है. So there is more compression towards the eastern India. So as a result, the entire northeast is taken as in zone 5. If you talk about northern Bihar, it is located on the Darbhanga fault line is the name, local name which is given. It is actually Himalayan front fault. Kutch, as we talked about, it is located on the Alaband fault line. Andaman and Nicobar, we know it is located near the Andaman Trench. Andaman. So likewise, these are the epicenters of the earthquakes, and that is why they are lying in zone 5, and these are also the areas where there is population living. Okay, and because of that they are classified as zone 5 of the earthquake. Then I would say, I would talk about the zone 4. So these are the areas where rest of Himalayas and adjoining Indo-Gangetic plains. And why they are in zone 4? Because still they are near to the epicenter. Okay, but they are not at the epicenter, they are near to the epicenter. That is why they are in zone 4. Similarly, if you talk about another area is part of Kutch and Kathiawar. Okay, so again it is near to the zone 5. Because of that it has high intensity. So I will explain zone 4. जैसे अभी हमने देखा था zone 3. I will talk about zone 3. हमने देखा था zone 3 are the areas which are further away from zone 4. One type of area. Second type of areas which are lying in zone 3, which are located on fault lines like Narmada, Tapi fault line, Damodar, Son, Mahanadi, Godavari, Western Ghats. So that areas will be zone 3. Zone 2 is essentially the safe havens, and these are basically located in the core of the ancient plateaus, shield areas. Okay. So again, because of that they are safe and there is less chances of the earthquakes occurring there. So I will explain, examine. Okay. So vulnerability of India to earthquakes. Now when I am talking about examination, because here there is examination, तो एक पार्ट हमने कर दिया, बट एग्जामिनेशन में हमेशा हमें क्या करना होता है, एज आई टोल्ड यू, थोड़ा सा नेगेटिव क्रिटिसिज्म भी लिखना होता है, शॉर्टकमिंग्स भी लिखनी होती है, तो यहां पर भी लिख सकते हैं. ठीक है. सो वी विल से दैट this vulnerability which we talked about, it is no doubt, it tells us on a broad level vulnerability of India to earthquakes. But can we say that vulnerability is also function of land use, as we talked about? And in land use particularly, several factors like strength of building structures, okay, and our knowledge about the strength of the building structures in many of these high earthquake intensity zones, the strength of the buildings, it is less, because people are poor and they are making houses according to their capacity. Government does not have that much of money to fund them, and we don't have even so much of, for example, civil engineers that we can do the seismic auditing of all the buildings and know what is essentially the vulnerability. Okay, so when it comes to macro level understanding of the risks, vulnerability, we have a good understanding. When it comes to the micro level, local level, our understanding, our zonation of mapping is limited. Okay, so this point can be written as the kind of criticism of the first part. Then propose short, medium term and long term steps to elevate the risk associated with it. I will come back to this. Okay, अभी मैं इस पे आता हूँ. I'll come back to this. Question number 3 पे आते हैं. This is the question for which it was in news and can be definitely asked in the exam. Examine the earthquake proneness in the world in general and Turkey in particular. So earthquake proneness, what I will do, I will again talk about earthquake. Occurrence of earthquake is outcome of what? Outcome of several natural and man-made phenomena. However, it is the plate tectonics which determines occurrence of majority of earthquakes. So simple introduction, सीधा start कर दिया and I start writing the main body. And earthquake proneness, अब world के point of view से लिखना है. मैं चाहता तो ये यहाँ पर जो हमने vulnerability और proneness की बात की थी, that I can also used here also, but वो vulnerability था और यहाँ पर proneness था. ठीक है. So proneness is more related with the natural phenomena of occurrence of the earthquake. ठीक है. So it will be answered by what? It will be essentially answered by ये जो मैप था हमारा which we talked about, So I will use the framework of the plate tectonics to essentially explain where these earthquakes are taking place. So इसमें मेरा framework क्या हो जाएगा इस आंसर में? इस आंसर में मेरा फ्रेमवर्क हो जाएगा the proneness of the earthquakes. If you talk about, it is related with three types. One is along the plate boundaries, and when you are talking about, you'll talk about the areas of convergent boundaries. So you'll specifically mention the Pacific ring of fire. You will specifically mention the other convergent zones. Like for example, if I am talking about the other convergent zones which can be mentioned, like for example, in the Caribbean region, small where there is presence of the such trenches, like in Indian Ocean, Java Sunda trench region. So all I will essentially mention here. So convergent boundaries, I will talk about the transform boundaries, where they are located. So like for example, one transform boundary where it is located on land, it is where? It is in California. ठीक है. अदर कन्वर्जेंट जोन्स में एक और होता है, ये होता है मिड कॉन्टिनेंटल बेल्ट. सो हाफ ऑफ द मिड कॉन्टिनेंटल बेल्ट, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट दिस हाफ, ये एल्प से लेकर के ये हिमालयाज वाला जो इधर तक बेल्ट आता है, this is mostly related with convergence. But part of the belt where there is, you can see Mediterranean region, this here where there is Turkish earthquake which occurred, it is actually related with transform boundary, where the plates are sliding past each other. So when you are talking about transform boundaries, एक California where again transform boundary is located, then you can definitely talk about the Mediterranean and the Middle East region. Okay. You can also mention the divergent boundaries, or इसमें you should mention about the Great African Rift Valley. So एक चीज हमने यहां पर बता दी, plate boundaries. But earthquakes, as we know, can also occur because of other factors and in intraplate regions. ठीक है. अब जब मैं इंट्राप्लेट के बारे में लिखूंगा तो हियर आई टॉक अबाउट दैट इट कैन बी एसोसिएटेड विथ नेचुरल फिनोमेना, जो हमने नेचुरल फिनोमेना की बात की थी, एंड दिस कैन बी रिलेटेड विथ एरियाज लाइक हॉटस्पॉट वॉल्केनिज्म. अभी हमने देखा था, वेरी गुड एग्जाम्पल वॉज हवाई, related with that. Okay. Or it can be related with others like meteorite impact. So it is what? The area is not fixed in that case. It can also be related with the human activities. So I'll talk about the vulnerability. In this case, in intraplate, it is not very fixed where the earthquakes will be taking place. So vulnerability zones are determined according to the causes which are mentioned. So that is what I would be answering here. So एक earthquake proneness in the world. फिर उसके बाद मैं specifically क्या करूंगा? I will talk about Turkey. So in this question, around 40 to 50% weight should be given to the first part, because the question is saying in general and Turkey in particular. So for Turkey, I have to give good weightage. So I'll give at least 50 to 60% of weight to writing about the Turkey. Okay. So again, that is the same thing which we are going to discuss in question number 4. Recently, Turkey experienced a devastating earthquake. What are the causes of Turkey being prone to earthquakes? What are the factors which made the recent Turkey earthquake so devastating? Okay. So if you talk about, there was earthquake in Turkey. So the question is, what makes this area so much essentially prone to earthquakes? So you can see that actually it is what Turkey is located. It is basically much of Turkey is Anatolia Plateau, and it is surrounded by various fault lines. It is located in the active tectonic zones of the world. So you can see that there is this Anatolia Plateau, and towards north of it lies the Eurasian plate. So there is a North Anatolian fault, which is again which is a strike slip fault, or what we call it as the transform fault. So it is a strike slip fault. That means the plates are sliding past each other. Rocks are sliding past each other. Similarly, towards the east of this, there is East Anatolia fault. So here again, it is also which type of fault? Strike slip fault. This is the convergence zone where convergence between the plates is taking place. So it is the fold and thrust belt. You know, there is Zagros mountains which are located here. So here it is the convergence zone. But here, this is a separate Anatolia plate actually. And it is a micro plate. And this is essentially the Arabian plate. And they are essentially what? They are sliding past each other. So you can understand when there is this sliding past with each other taking place. Just okay. So when they are sliding past each other, suppose these are two plates which are sliding past each other. So it can happen that the rough edges of the plates can be interlocked into each other, and because of which here there will be a phenomena which is referred to as seismic gap would develop. So there will be development of essentially what? A seismic gap. That means here there is no movement. Rest of the plate is moving. Here there is no movement. Why? Because the rock is bending and allowing rest of the plates to move. But here there is no such movement taking place. So a gap in movement has developed. That is referred to as the seismic gap. Okay. So if the rocks continue to bend, can we say a time will come ultimately when they will fracture, break, and that energy which was stored as stretch energy, it will be released. So this is something which essentially happened here in this East Anatolia fault, and that became the cause of such devastating earthquake. You can also understand, because this earthquake was a very shallow focus earthquake. It was very near to the surface, just around 10 kilometers. And as a result of which, what we are finding that it was an earthquake which was around 7.8 on the Richter scale. And that made it so much devastating. Okay. So, this is the phenomena which is there. So here I have just given you how a question can also be asked, like how strike slip earthquakes are different from the other earthquakes which are taking place. So strike slip earthquakes में क्या होता है? The plates or the rocks are moving, sliding past each other. There is horizontal movement taking place. Okay. Other type of earthquakes, like there is normal faulting can take place when the rocks are breaking and the parts are moving away from each other, like it is happening along the divergent boundaries. So that is normal faulting. Then there can be, when there is convergent boundaries, there the plates are moving towards each other, they will bend and they will again fracture. So one will rise over the other. So that is basically what? That is thrust faulting. So again, this type of question can also be asked. You should be ready with such type of question to answer. Okay. So because of these factors which I have mentioned, this was a very devastating earthquake, and the buildings, if you talk about, they almost collapsed. And the center of the quake, if you talk about, it was just around 18 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, which made it very most damaging earthquake. Okay, so one question on the basis of this which can be asked in the exam for you is, does the shallow focus earthquakes cause more damage? So this is something also, there can be a tail attached to it. So definitely we'll agree with this. Shallow focus earthquakes, they definitely lead to more damage. Okay, why? Because they are more near to the surface, and since they are near to the surface, the energy release will generate the waves which will very quickly reach to the surface. And essentially, if it is far away, you try to understand this point, that if suppose this is the surface, if this is one situation where the focus is there, this is one situation. So here, from here, when the waves are reaching, they will suddenly reach and with lots of energy. But when the waves are reaching from here, can we say there is also a force referred to as gravity, which will little bit retard its movement, and essentially because of that it will become little bit weaker, and because of that the intermediate focus and deep focus earthquakes, they will not be so much devastating as this shallow focus earthquake. So the more nearness to the surface, the greater will be the damage, the greater will be the intensity of the earthquake. ठीक है? So ये एक क्वेश्चन है. इनफैक्ट इस पे मैं एक और चीज सोच सकता हूं कि they can also ask you what are the factors which govern the intensity of earthquakes. So when you have to write, suppose about this, you can understand these factors will be number of them. For example, one very important factor will be magnitude of the earthquake. Higher the magnitude, greater will be the intensity. I hope you understand what is the difference between magnitude and intensity. Magnitude is essentially the amount of energy released. Intensity, if you talk about on the other hand, it is measure of the destruction, the effect of the earthquake. So it is related with the magnitude, then it would also be dependent upon the depth of focus. It would also be essentially dependent upon the distance from epicenter of the earthquake. It would also be dependent upon rock structure. So you can understand, if the rocks are strong, rigid rocks, then there will be less shaking, and because of that the buildings will less shake. But if you talk about the rocks have less rigidity, they will more shake, and if they are more shaking, that means there will be more shaking of the buildings taking place, and in that case more buildings will fall, there will be more destruction. Okay, so rock structure is another factor which is there. As I have told you, another factor is association with other hazards, that also determines the intensity of destruction which will be caused. And as we talked about, other factors like, very important is the land use intensity. So for example, if an area we are talking about where no one is living, a bare area, a desert area, if there the earthquake is taking place, it would not cause so much of destruction because there will be less buildings to fall, there will be less people who will be affected. On the other hand, if an area we are talking about, like when like something of an urban area, metropolitan city, there is more people, there are more buildings, so again there will be more intensity. And finally, if you talk about, it is also related with the strength of buildings. Okay, so in fact it is many times said that it is not the earthquakes which take life, it is the buildings that do. So if weak buildings are there, they will fall, and then there will be destruction, loss of life and everything. Okay, so another question, another thing which we can predict, which they can ask you about is the intensity, because the intensity here in this case of the Turkish earthquake, it was high. Okay, so that is one thing. Then if you talk about another thing about which were in news 1-2 years back, it was earthquake swarms. But this year also a similar kind of phenomena was occurring, and this was the thing that we were seeing in Turkey. Not only the major, that big earthquake came, but also several, if you talk about small earthquakes, continue to come in that region. So one type of question which can be asked is, what are earthquake swarms and how they are different from the foreshocks and aftershocks? So essentially, earthquake swarms kya hote hain? It is a situation where number of earthquakes are taking place, and basically all these earthquakes are low intensity earthquakes. Okay, and they are very frequently occurring. Like for example, last year there was such a situation occurring in Delhi. There were frequent earthquakes, very in a very short interval of time. Such earthquakes were coming just at an interval of 1 to 2 days, and they were low intensity earthquakes. So that is why that time that earthquake swarm was in news. So when this was this year occurring in Turkey, people speculated that is it earthquake swarms taking place, but definitely that was not earthquake swarms, because in case of earthquake swarms, earthquakes are, or most of the earthquakes they are occurring, they are of low intensity, and they are occurring at very short interval of time, very regularly for long period of time. Okay. In case of Turkey, there was main shock which occurred, and normally what happens when the earthquakes are occurring, such kind of big earthquakes, they will be preceded by foreshocks, and after that also there can be some aftershocks. So here you can see foreshocks, red ones, aftershocks, again red ones, the main shock is here made as blue one. Okay, so that is how the earthquake swarms are different from. So why these foreshocks and aftershocks are essentially caused? Because it is very similar to, you can imagine, अगर मैं एक स्टिक को पकड़ के तोड़ता हूं तो स्टिक टूटने से पहले क्या होगा, उसमें छोटी छोटी दरारें पड़ने लगती हैं, ठीक है, स्मॉल क्रैक्स वुड अपीयर इन द स्टिक. So that same thing is happening also in rocks, because of which these foreshocks essentially are coming. Okay. Later also, because there will be disturbance when even after the fracture, if you talk about, and because of that there will be also some aftershocks which will be coming up. So that is how it was the case of Turkey. It was not the kind of earthquake swarms. Earthquake swarms are generally taking place in the active region where there is movement of the plate is taking place, and plate is actually moving. There is no such very large seismic gap which has developed, and it is moving, but there is some resistance in the movement which is essentially causing the earthquake swarms. Okay? Or they can be caused by some kind of phenomena which is taking place below, like for example some kind of salt plumes rising or magma plumes rising. They can also cause such kind of swarming which is there. ठीक है. अब इसमें एक और क्वेश्चन ये हो सकता है which I have taken up there, seismic noise. So what is essentially seismic noise, and if you talk about how it is different from the swarms. So seismic noise, as you can see here, it is written also, it refers to a relatively persistent vibration of the ground which is occurring. It is unwanted component of signals recorded by the seismometers or the seismograms. You know, seismograms are kept below the ground, and they essentially record the shaking vibration which is taking place in the crust. So what is happening? Sometimes there can be this seismic noise, and this seismic noise is actually vibrations which are caused by human activity, such as transportation is taking place, or manufacturing activities or mining activities, etc. are taking place in a particular area. So there can be some vibration related with these human activities. So these type of situations are referred to as the seismic noise. Okay, so again there can be a question related with this seismic noise. ये भी यहाँ पर हमने दे दिया है. So you just look into that. Then as I have talked about seismic gaps, this was essentially in news related with the Turkish earthquake. So seismic gap क्या होता है? जैसा कि मैंने बताया था अभी कि in situation where suppose these plates are moving but a part of the plate is stuck, it is interlocked because of rough edges. So यहाँ पर movement हो रहा है plate का. Here also the movement is taking place. Why? Because here the rocks are bending and allowing the other parts to move. Okay. and here that means movement has stopped for long period of time. ठीक है? Can you imagine? This can be measured through satellite imagery. So we can know where there is development of the seismic gaps. So wherever there are seismic gaps, it is indicative of the fact that there is a chance that a big earthquake will come in that particular area. Because this means over a long period of time, there is lots of stress which has developed in that particular area. And in future, because the rocks are bending, in future they will also fracture, releasing enormous amount of energy. Okay? So that is the significance of seismic. From our perspective, you can understand that in NASA has calculated that in the Western Himalayas, there is a seismic gap which has developed, and this would be released in future. And that is something which is a worry for us, because nearby, so many, if you talk about habitated areas are located. The nearby area, the Indo-Gangetic plains, if you talk about, they are densely populated. So it can be very, very devastating. So here I have just given you some of the examples, past examples of the seismic gaps which have essentially taken place. And like for example, you can see here one thing, this was in news, it is the Central Himalayan Gap which is there. So it was there, although there had been earthquakes to the west in 1905 and to the east in 1900, there was a 600-kilometer long region of the Central Himalayan that had not ruptured since 1505. It was in April 2015, 7.8, if you talk about Richter scale, 2015 mein Nepal earthquake occurred in this region. Okay, so again, this is a very good example which you can talk about when you are writing about the seismic gaps. So that is something which I should be knowing about the earthquakes. So from the earthquake, I believe this will cover more or less whatever the type of question UPSC can think, and with this knowledge you will be essentially in a position to answer majority of the question. Now finally, one thing is left in this topic, and that is the management of the earthquake. As I have told you, because some parts of disaster management will do here itself. Okay, so if you talk about the earthquake management, here are the 6 pillars of earthquake management. And देखो, हमेशा हमें याद रखना है कि whenever you talk about disasters and disaster management, always there are steps of disaster management, and this general formula you can apply in any type of disaster. So first step is what? First step is always being aware of the problem. So here it is vulnerability mapping will be taking place. So first you'll map the vulnerability of the area. Then vulnerability mapping के बाद हम क्या करते हैं? On the basis of that, we will formulate a suitable land use policy. Suitable land use policy. Then if you talk about the third very important thing, once you have formulated the policy, then comes the second part, next part, that is implementation of the policy. Okay. Also, you can understand there will be other things like awareness and training of the people, because always you can understand that till humans are involved, there will be no disasters. That means humans have to be trained, made aware about how to deal with the disasters. Also, it is understood that today we know that disasters cannot be controlled. At best, what we can do, we can manage them. That means disasters will occur because they are natural phenomena. when we are talking about the natural disasters. So that means we should also be ready for the risk management, or if you talk about the it is basically emergency relief. I have written risk, sorry. Emergency relief policy. Okay, so all of these if you talk about, they are part and parcel of the disaster management. अब यही चीज हम फॉर्मूला लगाते हैं earthquakes में. So earthquakes में सबसे पहला इसमें it is not written among the six pillars. The first will be vulnerability mapping should be done. We have already created a macro map of India about the vulnerability zones. In those vulnerability zones, basically what we will be doing. Second is formulate a suitable land use policy. So you know there is a law which we have made. It is the National Building Code 2006. So it talks about what should be the strength of buildings in particular area, what should be the height, area, floor ratio, everything is defined in this National Building Code. Okay. Then comes the implementation of the policy. So implementation, when we are talking about, it can take two forms. Implementation with respect to new developments. So suppose a new building is to be made, it has to strictly adhere to the National Building Code. Okay, but there can be a chance where there is presence of already old buildings and they are not so much stronger. They might not be so much stronger. Okay, so for that what to do? So for already present older structures, we have there should be a seismic retrofitting policy. Okay, so a seismic retrofitting policy. So again, retrofitting क्या होता है? It is strengthening of the building. So seismic retrofitting, ultimately there is a commission which is chaired by your district magistrate, you know, and maybe you will become one day IAS and you will be chairing such committees. So here there are other technical experts like civil engineers. So first step here is doing the seismic auditing of the buildings, and then when the seismic auditing is done, then the strength of the structures is determined. And in the seismic retrofitting policy, it is very clearly mentioned that if the cost of retrofitting is less than 50% of making new building, then we will go for retrofitting. If the cost is between 50 to 70% of the new building, if it is to be constructed, then what will happen? We will essentially, the committee will determine. If the cost is above 70%, then the structure should be dismantled and a new structure should be created. Okay, so this is the seismic retrofitting policy. But you can understand, in a country like India, we do not have so much of resources. And since we do not have so much of resources, we have to prioritize. So in India, in the seismic retrofitting policy, we give priority to the critical lifeline infrastructure and heritage buildings. Okay, so that is basically given the priority. So that is part and parcel of that. Similarly, awareness and training about the disaster. So in earthquakes, people should be made aware about number of things. Like for example, you should know which is the case when there can be a threat of earthquake. Like for example, if you talk about if there is strange behavior of animals like howling, crying of dogs and cats, strange behavior of birds, that is indication that there is something like such phenomena going to take place. Okay, so people should be aware. They should be aware. Suppose if you are in house you are not able to go out. One way is you can save yourself if you are going in open area. But if you are not able to go out, because today there is vertical structures, so much tall structures are there, where you are more safe. You should hide behind, suppose there is a strong table or bed, or even if it is not the case, you can stand along the corners. Corners are more stronger. Okay, so such kind of awareness and training for the general public and all the stakeholders should be done. And definitely there is the crisis or the emergency relief policy, which will be, you can understand, common to majority of the disasters. Okay, so that is basically the way in which the earthquake should be managed. So more or less similar, this is the 6 pillars which the NDMA talks about of the earthquake management. So this is the strategy of earthquake management. But suppose एक question आ जाता है कि what are the shortcomings in the earthquake management? So there are some shortcomings which you can definitely talk about. So we are talking about, for example, here we are talking about the vulnerability mapping. So as we said, अभी हमने बात किया था macro level पे तो हमारी vulnerability mapping अच्छी है, but when it comes to micro zonation, it is not so well developed. So that is one of the weaknesses that we have. If you talk about land use policy, we have developed the national building code, but the implementation of the building code, again there are problems. There was, for example, a research which was conducted in Delhi NCR region, and it was found that majority of the vertical structures which are created in the surrounding areas of Gurgaon, and if you talk about Noida, Greater Noida, most of these structures are very weak and they are very prone. Their chances of them falling if there is a strong earthquake is very high. Okay, so when it comes to implementation, there is some corruption, there is neglect, and because of that there is problem. Similarly, if you talk about when we are talking about the seismic retrofitting policy, there is not enough manpower, personnel available. For example, there is scarcity of there is not enough civil engineers available to do the retrofitting of the entire vulnerable zones which are there in India. So again, there also we are lacking. Then if you talk about when it comes to awareness and training, tell me how many mock drills you have been part of till now in your life. Again, it is far more on paper rather than in reality. Okay, there are shortcomings also in our emergency relief policy. We'll later talk about paper 3. There we'll talk about the ARC, second ARC report on various shortcomings. बाद में हम बात करेंगे जब paper 3 के लिए बात करूंगा मैं, तो वहां से also some of the points you can pick up and you can write. Okay, so that is basically the case of your earthquakes. So let us move on now, and the next topic is that of landslides. Now if I talk about the landslides, question is why I am taking up this landslide topic, because in recent times you might have read about that there was release of the landslide atlas of India. Okay, and this landslide atlas talks about the vulnerability of various areas which are very prone to landslides. Okay, so because of that it was in news. So because of that the question can come, you know, there was also a phenomenon of land sinking in Joshimath. So that is another reason. It is also a type of landslide. So that is also one of the reasons why there can be a broader question on landslide may be asked. Okay, also there was a very recent news about if you talk about like for example, you can see here frequency of landslides is increasing in Himachal Pradesh. For example, Himachal Pradesh has experienced 6-time increase in major landslides in the past 2 years. 6-time increase. So again, it is a very recent news of 2023, this news is. So there is a possibility that there can be a question asked from this topic as well. So landslide, that is why let us little bit very quickly look into the landslide. So as we have done for rest of for earthquake, here also we'll do the same thing. So first thing which should know, what is a landslide? So landslide is essentially what? It is a rapid movement. In fact, यहाँ पे एक word add कर देते हैं. It is a rapid movement of mass of rock, debris or earth down a slope under influence of what? Under direct influence of gravity. Okay, so such a phenomena is referred to as landslide. So landslide encompasses various type of modes of slope movement like falls, topple, slides, spread, flows. So देखो न्यूज में क्या क्या रहा है? We know that in news there was land sinking was in news. Another thing which was in news was land slides were in news. इसी का एक ब्रॉडर अगर मैं देखूं तो ज्योग्राफी में देर इज अ फिनोमेना विच इज रेफर टू एज मास वेस्टिंग. So all of these are basically what? They are just a type of mass wasting which are taking place. There might be even a question asked, एक ट्रेडिशनली क्वेश्चन पूछ सकता है मास वेस्टिंग पे, ऑल्दो मैंने यहां पर लिया नहीं है. आई हैव फोकस्ड मोर ऑन लैंडस्लाइड्स एंड लैंड सिंकिंग. ठीक है. सो दैट इज व्हाट इज एसेंशियली लैंडस्लाइड. सो लैंडस्लाइड क्या होता है? मास वेस्टिंग देखो क्या होता है. मास वेस्टिंग इज movement of debris or rocks down slope under influence of gravity. So what is mass wasting? It is movement is one keyword. Movement of what? Movement of rock, movement of debris, movement of soil. All these things can move. Where they can move? Another keyword is down slope. Then another keyword is what? Under influence of gravity. Okay. So these are the keywords you'll remember for the definition of mass wasting. This is the same with respect to if you talk about landslides also. The only difference is landslides are faster type of mass wasting events. So mass wasting, depending upon the velocity of movement of this, can be divided into three categories. They are very fast, they are fast and there can be slow. So very fast में कई तरह के mass wasting events हो सकते हैं. Like there can be a fall, rock or debris fall. There can be a phenomena referred to as slide. A type of slide is referred to as avalanche. Okay. So all of these are very fast movements which are taking place. Fast movement में flows होते हैं where there is lots of involvement of water. So there is mud flow and earth flow. And slow movements में दो तरीके के movement होते हैं. One is creep, like soil creep, and there is solifluction. So what is essentially landslide? This two categories are put under landslide. These two type of mass movements are landslides. ठीक है. So that is the case of landslides. अब इससे रिलेटेड एक चीज हमें पता होनी चाहिए, फैक्टर्स कंट्रोलिंग लैंडस्लाइड. तो फैक्टर्स कौन कौन से फैक्टर्स कंट्रोल करते हैं? ये सेम चीज अगर फैक्टर्स कंट्रोलिंग मास वेस्टिंग है तो सेम होगा, लैंडस्लाइड्स है तो सेम होगा, बिकॉज बोथ आर सिमिलर फिनोमेना. तो वन फैक्टर विच कंट्रोल्स इट इज द स्टीपनेस ऑफ स्लोप. ओके. सो वेयर द स्टीपनेस ऑफ द स्लोप विल बी हायर, it will be higher in the hilly and mountainous areas. So you can understand, because of that, in hilly and mountainous areas there will be more landslides taking place. Particularly, for example, take the case of Himalayas. In Himalayas, what we find, there is like this, mountains are present and there is a river flowing here at the base of the mountain. So what this river is doing, can we say this river is undercutting the base of the mountains? As a result, there will be very steep slopes which will be created because there will be landslides. So steepness of a slope is one very dominant factor which will determine the landslides taking place, the intensity, the frequency of landslides. ठीक है. Amount of water involved, this is also a very important factor. You might have heard many times, when there is heavy precipitation event or because of certain other reasons there is storage of water taking place in a particular area, there are landslides. So water क्या करता है? दो तरीके से landslides को trigger करता है. How it triggers? One, water behaves as a lubricating agent. ठीक है, it is behaving essentially as a lubricating agent. So if debris is there, if water enters into the debris, it will lessen the friction and it would behave as a lubricating agent. The material can flow easily. Second thing it can do is water itself, if water is present, it can add weight to the material, which in itself may be enough to trigger mass wasting. So in two ways what will happen, water can essentially, amount of water involved can trigger mass wasting. So here we are talking about, suppose this is the material which was lying, and if suppose in this material there is entry of water, water enters here, what will happen? It will behave as a lubricating agent. So material can essentially flow. Also you can understand that it is also adding weight to the material, which in itself might be enough to trigger this landslides. So that is one very important factor. Then if you talk about other factor is rock structure. So many type of rock structures, they can lead to, if you talk about more mass wasting events, for example, rock structure, if rock structure is suppose weak, what will happen? If it is weak, can we say there will be more weathering of rocks taking place, breaking of the rocks? That means there will be more mass wasting taking place. Similarly, there can be some specific type of rock structures which can trigger more mass wasting. Like for example, think, suppose this is a situation where there is this type of scenario is found. So here there is a aquifer. Aquifer का पता है aquifer क्या होता है? Aquifer is a permeable rock, ठीक है, which is lying over an aquiclude. Aquiclude क्या होता है? It is an impermeable, ठीक है. तो यहां पर ये वाली रॉक जो है, this is impermeable and this layer is permeable. What can happen? Can we say कि अगर ऐसा है तो when water is seeping through, water cannot go beyond this impermeable layer. Does it means that lots of water will get collected in this permeable layer? And again, as we saw, this might be enough to trigger mass wasting or landslides. So that is another factor. Similarly, if you talk about vegetation cover, it is also a very, very important factor. Vegetation cover, you can understand if there is vegetation, what the trees roots do, they bind the soil, and because of that they will lower the intensity of mass wasting event. They will protect the rocks, they will protect the soil. So more the vegetation cover, there will be less chances of such landslides taking place. Also you can understand another factor is anthropogenic activities. What we are doing through our activities like construction, mining, we are damaging these slopes, we are making them unstable. So that is also one of the factors which is essentially controlling the landslides. Okay, so this is something which we know. And if you talk about the causes of landslide, as I talked about, इसी factors के basis पे मैं causes के बारे में समझ सकता हूँ. तो it can be related with natural causes. So it can be related with the steepness of the slope, it can be related with amount of water which is involved. So here if you talk about some meteorological events or melting of ice, etc., all of this can trigger mass wasting events. Okay. Similarly, if you talk about removal of vegetation cover, for example, in an area, suppose there is, because of natural factors, forest fires is taking place, that can also trigger mass wasting. In fact, इसमें एक और point मुझे लिखना चाहिए था, I have just forgotten, I'll just write it here now. एक और पॉइंट यहां पर मुझे लिखना चाहिए. लैंडस्लाइड्स कैन ऑल्सो बी ट्रिगर्ड बाय अदर हजार्ड्स. अदर हजार्ड्स. So for example, अभी हमने देखा था हिमालयाज में, if there is earthquakes, can we say there is shaking of the earth will take place, crust will take place? Can it trigger landslides? Yes, it can trigger landslides. If there is forest fires, it will remove vegetation and it can trigger landslides. If there is flash floods, if there is cloud burst, again it can trigger landslides. Okay, so again that is also one factor. So same thing, same way, what you will do, if you have to suppose write the causes of the landslides, you will write about the causes of the landslide. वो हम आसानी से आंसर कर सकते हैं. So what are the causes, उसको हम डिवाइड भी कर सकते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल मॉर्फोलॉजिकल कॉजेज में, एंथ्रोपोजेनिक कॉजेज में. इनफैक्ट इसको एक ही कॉज में लिखो, नेचुरल कॉजेज एंड ह्यूमन और एंथ्रोपोजेनिक कॉजेज. तो इजिली हम इसको आंसर कर सकते हैं if we talk about this. Then you can understand impact of landslide. It is, I've given you, it will cause loss of life and property. Some examples you can take up, more recent examples. Decimation of infrastructure. It would also impact natural systems like river systems can be affected because of that. Okay, the area beauty can be affected. So all of these basically you can write about. So the question is, what type of questions can be asked in this topic of landslide? So one question is, what are landslides? Explain the factors that control landslide. ये अभी हमने कर लिया, ठीक है. अब इसमें भी देखो क्या है, कैसे इसको आंसर करना. सबसे पहले जब मैं क्वेश्चन पढ़ता हूं तो आई ऑलवेज आइडेंटिफाई द प्राइमरी कीवर्ड्स. तो एक यहां पर दो, पहली बात तो इसके दो क्वेश्चन है इसमें, एक क्वेश्चन में, यानी कि दो प्राइमरी कीवर्ड होंगे. यहां पर लैंडस्लाइड इज वन प्राइमरी कीवर्ड एंड अदर इज द फैक्टर्स व्हिच इज कंट्रोलिंग. सो देयर आर टू प्राइमरी कीवर्ड्स. फॉर फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन द सेकेंडरी कीवर्ड इज व्हाट, जो कि कौन सा कैटेगरी कीवर्ड है, कैटेगरी 1 कीवर्ड. फॉर द सेकेंड क्वेश्चन द कीवर्ड इज एक्सप्लेन, व्हिच इज सेकेंड कैटेगरी कीवर्ड. और हमने क्या देखा था, जैसे जैसे हम फर्स्ट से फोर्थ कैटेगरी की तरफ बढ़ रहे थे तो डिफिकल्टी बढ़ रही थी, और डिफिकल्टी बढ़ रही है तो इसका मतलब वेटेज ऑफ मार्क्स भी बढ़ेगा. ठीक है, इसका मतलब जब मैं अपना आंसर लिखूंगा तो मुझे जो नंबर ऑफ वर्ड्स है उसी हिसाब से शेयर करना चाहिए. सो व्हेन आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट वाटर लैंडस्लाइड्स, आई शुड राइट अराउंड 30 to 40% here. When I am talking about explain the factors that are controlling landslides, I should essentially write here how much, 60 to 70% of the main body should be written here. So landslide में क्या क्या लिखेंगे, I will write the definition. So here when I am talking about the landslides, what are landslides, first part में I'll write about the definition of the landslide. I will also talk about which type of mass wasting phenomena are classified under landslides. ठीक है. सो अभी हमने देखा था, वी हैड जस्ट नाउ सीन which type of land events, the very fast and fast, which includes the fast slide, avalanches. In fact इसमें एक और rotational slide होता है जिसको बोलते हैं slump, and the flow type of movements including the mud flow and the earth flow. These are classified as the landslides. So once I have answered this, what I have done, essentially I have answered the question. ठीक है, first part of the question, which is what are landslides, and then I will move to the second part, that is the factors I have to explain. तो अभी हमने देखा था, हमने अभी factors को explain किया, all the factors which I talked about, जो यहां पर थे. So कितने फैक्टर्स देखे, स्टीपनेस ऑफ स्लोप, अमाउंट ऑफ वाटर इन्वॉल्व, रॉक स्ट्रक्चर, वेजिटेशन कवर, एंथ्रोपोजेनिक एक्टिविटीज एंड रिलेशनशिप विद अदर हजार्ड्स. ठीक है, एक टेक्निकल वर्ड भी यूज कर सकते हो, कैस्केडिंग रिलेशनशिप विद अदर हजार्ड्स. सो दैट इज बेसिकली हाउ आई विल बी आंसरिंग दिस क्वेश्चन. इसका इंट्रोडक्शन क्या हो सकता था, you could have written like अभी हमने देखा था, did we talk about the Himachal case, could we have written it as an introduction, because हमेशा याद रखना कि कोई भी क्वेश्चन जब पूछा जा रहा है, you ask yourself why this question has been asked, what is the relevance, and if you ask yourself that question, you'll remember कि ये किसी event से related होगा तभी पूछा गया, and that event can be our introduction. ठीक है, that is one thing. Conclusion में हम क्या लिख सकते हैं? Can we talk about the damages which are being caused by the landslides and how we have to essentially make sure that such damages can be minimized? So something on that line we can write about the conclusion. ठीक है. Then another question is, bring out the causes for more frequent landslides in the Himalayas than in the Western Ghats. This is a previous year question which I have taken. If you look into the previous year questions, you'll be finding that 3 times the question on landslide in the Himalayas, and 2 times this in that 3 times 2 times this difference in Himalayas and Western Ghats has been asked. ठीक है. तो अगर मुझे आंसर करना है हिमालयस और वेस्टर्न घाट्स में डिफरेंस क्या है, क्यों हिमालयस में ज्यादा लैंडस्लाइड हो रहा है, कैन वी से कि अगेन मैं वहीं पे चला जाऊंगा. आई विल जस्ट थिंक फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ एक फैक्टर किससे रिलेटेड होगा. कैन इट बी वी से दैट कैन बी रिलेटेड विथ स्टीपनेस ऑफ स्लोप से रिलेटेड हो सकता है. ठीक है. सो वी नो हिमालयस क्या है, हिमालयस आर young fold mountains, and in such young fold mountains we find that there are several such kind of V-shaped valleys. There are active rivers with lots of energy which are flowing. So what these rivers will do, they very frequently cut at the base of the mountains, and because of that what will happen here, this base of the mountain, if it is cut, can we say supporting material is getting removed? Supporting material is essentially removed. As a result, there will be frequent landslides and steepness of the slope will be maintained. ठीक है. So इसीलिए हिमालयस में steepness of slope is quite high and they are also taller. So that is one thing I can write. Similarly, हमने दूसरा फैक्टर क्या देखा था, वाटर विच इज इन्वॉल्व. अब इसमें बहुत ज्यादा दोनों में डिफरेंस नहीं है, बिकॉज वी नो actually what happens, Western Ghats actually receive very heavy precipitation. ठीक है. But we can definitely talk about the northeast India, and northeast में जो हिमालयस है, they are receiving very very heavy precipitation. That is one of the reasons why we find that there are more frequent landslides, particularly in the northeast India. But हिमालयस के टर्म्स में वाटर की बात हम कर सकते हैं. कैसे कर सकते हैं? Tell me, can we say that हिमालयस में water, presence of water is throughout the year? ठीक है. इन summers there is also summer, and even in winter there is melting of the glaciers taking place. That also leads to constant seepage of water which is taking place, and that also becomes the cause essentially of these landslides, more landslides taking place in the Himalayan region. In fact, even in Western Himalayas, you know that there is western disturbances. There are frequent, if you talk about cloud bursts taking place, meteorological phenomena in the Himalayan region. So again, that is also one of the reasons there is such kind of events occurring. In fact, you know, in Himalayas, there is another phenomena, glacial lake outbursts. There are so many lakes which are there. Again, from these lakes also there is seepage of water going through. Again, it becomes one of the causes of the landslides. So again, even in case of water, we can write something to justify that there is more landslides taking place in the Himalayas than in the Western Ghats. ठीक है. Coming to third phenomena जो हमने बात किया था, rock structure. So if you talk about the rock structure, Himalayas, the upper layer of these mountains, it is made up of which type of rocks? It is sedimentary rocks. And we know sedimentary rocks are weaker, there will be more weathering taking place, and as a result of which there will be more mass wasting, more landslides events which will be taking place in the Himalayan region. On the other hand, if you talk about Western Ghats, half of the Western Ghats are made up of granite and very strong other rock, metamorphic rock, gneiss. So if they are made up of granite and gneiss, you can understand from Goa till south, the Western Ghats are made up of granite and gneisses. which are very strong rocks. So there will be less weathering taking place, and thus what will happen? There will be less landslides taking place comparatively, I am saying. Okay, actually, if you look into the numbers, Kerala has witnessed so many landslides. Here we are again talking about comparative analysis. Northern Western Ghats, if you talk about, it is again covered with igneous rock basalt, which is comparatively stronger again than the sedimentary rock. So again, rock structure is one of the factors. Then if you talk about the other, we talked about cascading relationship with other hazards. तो वी नो कि अगर मैं वेस्टर्न घाट्स की बात कर रहा हूं तो मेनली यहां पर जो कैस्केडिंग रिलेशनशिप है वो किससे है? इट इज रिलेटेड विथ हैवी प्रेसिपिटेशन इवेंट्स के साथ रिलेशन है एंड क्लाउड बर्स्ट. दिस इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग. बट व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट हिमालयस, यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड दैट इट इज नॉट, ये तो होता ही है हिमालयाज में, बट साथ में यहां पर it is earthquakes also taking place. So that also makes the Himalayas more prone to landslides. When it comes to vegetation, एक और फैक्टर हमने लिया था वेजिटेशन का. So we know Western Ghats, they are more heavily vegetated than if you talk about the Himalayas. You know, Himalayas, the interior part of the Himalayas, they are lying in the rain shadow zone. So there is sparse vegetation found. As a result, there is more landslides taking place there. Then if you talk about other thing we talked about was the anthropogenic activities. So anthropogenic activities are becoming reason in both the cases. In fact, this is the reason in recent times why in Western Ghats also the intensity and frequency of landslides has increased. Okay. Himalayas में तो है ही है, you know, in Himalayas so much construction, tourism activities are taking place. In fact, in Himalayas also mining activities have become very important. So mining, for example, mining of limestone is very, very dominant activity taking place in the Himalayan region. Okay, but you cannot separate in terms of anthropogenic activities because Western Ghats में भी anthropogenic activities are very dominant, like the plantation agriculture, if you talk about, or mining which is taking place, construction which is taking place. So on this point you can say, conclude कर सकते हो लास्ट में कि because of these anthropogenic activities, what is happening in recent times, Western Ghats have also become highly vulnerable. Okay, so this is the question. Then question number 3, examine the vulnerability of India to landslides. What steps are need to be taken to reduce the risk of landslides in India? ठीक है, so what is the vulnerability of India to landslides? अब मुझे अगर vulnerability की बात करनी है तो मेरे दिमाग में एक चीज आती है जो मैंने अभी recent times में पढ़ा है, and this is the landslide atlas of India, okay, which talks about the vulnerability. So why it was in news? Because recently the National Remote Sensing Center under ISRO has released landslide atlas of India, a detailed guide identifying landslide hotspots in the country. So National Remote Sensing Center has mandate for remote sensing, satellite data acquisition processing, so it is doing. So how atlas was prepared? It is talking about that. In this question, it is not very important for us. Here is the important thing for us. What are the key highlights? It was found that states like Uttarakhand, Kerala, Jammu and Kashmir, Mizoram, Tripura, Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh reported the highest number of landslides during the period of 1998 to 2022. In fact, Mizoram, if you talk about, topped the list, recording around 12,000 landslide events in the past 25 years, of which around 9,000 were recorded in 2017 alone. It was followed by Uttarakhand, and then there is, as I told you, Kerala as well. Uttarakhand's fragility was recently exposed during the subsidence event reported in Joshimanth. Okay, so number of areas have been there. So in fact, when we are answering this question, we can definitely talk about the vulnerability of landslides to India, और उसमें हम zones बना सकते हैं. We can talk about there is very high vulnerability, then there is high vulnerability, then there is moderate to moderately high, then there is low hazard vulnerability, and then there is the low vulnerability. इसमें एक दो चीज़ें इसमें ऐड नहीं है, like for example, if I add here, there are some areas where you should mark them as moderately. There is moderate vulnerability even in these areas. For example, one area of moderate vulnerability I will also mark as the Aravalli region. In recent times, there has been lots of mining activities taking place in this area, and here also there is some, if you talk about such landslides taking place. One other area where which is also very frequently landslides are taking place is the Chota Nagpur Plateau. So in Chota Nagpur Plateau, mining is one of the basic phenomena which is taking place. So this mining has led to this area becoming moderate to moderately high hazard zone of landslides. Another area is, if you talk about Bastar Plateau and this northern Sarkars region. So again, this area, again, it is related with what? The human activities of mining, due to which we should classify it under moderate to moderately high hazard zone. ठीक है. सो अब मुझे अगर ये लिखना है इस आंसर को, तो मैं क्या करूंगा? हर कैटेगरी को डिफाइन करूंगा कि कौन कौन से एरियाज आ रहे हैं उसमें. ठीक है, मैं एक इसको रख सकता हूं वेरी हाई, और हाई को एक कर देते हैं, एंड मॉडरेट एंड लो. ठीक है. सो अब सपोज करो कि मुझे वेरी हाई हजार्ड जोन के बारे में, तो यू कैन वेरी क्लियरली सी मेनली वेरी हाई हजार्ड जोन कौन सा? कैन वी से द वेरी हाई हजार्ड जोन इज द रेंजेस ऑफ, can you see Shivalik, the ranges of middle Himalayas and the great Himalayas. ठीक है. Also you can see the foothills of these regions like in Sikkim, Arunachal foothills, can you see? Similarly we can talk about the Manipur zone, and also this rest of the Arunachal region. So all of these essentially are the areas where there is high vulnerability. अब मुझे vulnerability के बारे में लिखना है, तो मुझे तो पता है क्योंकि मैंने तो मास्टर प्लान पहले ही पढ़ लिया. और मास्टर प्लान क्या है? I know it would be related with what? If I have to explain it, can I say I can explain? It is related with what? Steepness of the slope. It would be related with availability of water, meteorological events, geomorphological events which are leading to accumulation of water in these areas. It would be related with what? It would be related with the rock structure. Again, it would be related with cascading effects with other hazards. It would be related with what? Vegetation. It would be related with the anthropogenic activities. So इन्हीं के बेसिस पे मैं एक्सप्लेन कर सकता हूं कि why it is a high zone, why it is a medium zone, and why it is a low zone. ठीक है. So again, I can answer this question easily. So examine the vulnerability of India to landslide zone. अब यहां पर फिर से examine आ गया, इसका मतलब मुझे कुछ shortcoming तो लिखना चाहिए. So when we are talking about the vulnerability, we have we'll see that the agency which is responsible for this vulnerability mapping, landslide vulnerability mapping, it is GSI, Geological Survey of India. Okay. So if we talk about, along with ISRO, if you talk about, they are responsible for this. If we talk about this phenomena, issue is that we have available, okay, we have available the macro zonation of vulnerability. But when it comes to the micro zonation of vulnerability in these areas, it is still limited. And in this context, you can understand this vulnerability atlas which was released recently was very important, because it expands our, if you talk about the zonation mapping. Okay. So that is where I can write about that our mapping of vulnerability with respect to micro-zonation of the zones is limited. And again, you can talk about why it is limited, because there is scarcity of resources. There is not enough, if you talk about manpower, engineers available to take up this task. These are remote areas where there is, if you talk about hard terrains, difficult terrains are present there. Okay? So all of these you can write and you can justify the keyword which is used there, examine. Okay? What steps need to be taken? अभी मैं इसको लास्ट में करवा देता हूँ. तो क्वेश्चन नंबर 4 पे आते हैं. इन रीसेंट टाइम्स हिमाचल प्रदेश हैज एक्सपीरियंस इंक्रीज फ्रीक्वेंसी ऑफ लैंडस्लाइड्स. एग्जामिन द अंडरलाइंग कॉजेज एंड सजेस्ट रेमेडियल मेजर्स टू टैकल द प्रॉब्लम. ठीक है. सो अगेन ये भी मैंने यहां पर दे दिया. यू कैन जस्ट गो थ्रू दैट. सो हियर यू कैन सी, as we said, Himachal Pradesh has experienced 6-time increase in major landslides in the past 2 years. According to data from the Disaster Management Department, there were 117 major landslides in the state in 2022 alone, compared to there were only 16 in 2020. There are a total of 17,000 landslide prone sites in Himachal Pradesh. Out of these sites, 675 are located near critical infrastructure and habitation. The districts with highest number of landslides was Chamba. So इसमें कुछ factual information है, इतना याद नहीं होगा, but एक चंबा नाम याद रख सकते हो. Because in this answer, when such questions are asked, you also have to give the specific factual details of the particular phenomena which has been asked. If you are not giving, if you are just writing generally, तो जो मार्क्स होंगे वो तुम्हारे ज्यादा से ज्यादा पहुंचेंगे 40%. ठीक है. लेकिन अगर हम स्पेसिफिक डिटेल्स भी लिखते हैं तो हमारे मार्क्स बढ़ के 60%, 70% भी हो सकते. ठीक है. सो द क्वेश्चन इज व्हाई देयर इज इंक्रीजिंग लैंडस्लाइड्स इन द हिमाचल प्रदेश. सो एक्सपर्ट्स एट्रीब्यूट द राइज इन लैंडस्लाइड्स टू एक्सटेंसिव हिल स्लोप कटिंग फॉर व्हाट? फॉर कंस्ट्रक्शन and road widening which is taking place in the Himalayas. So mainly why there is this increase in the landslides, it is related with the anthropogenic phenomena. So human beings क्या कर रहे हैं? You know, there is lots of construction activities taking place because there is increase in the tourism. So what we have done, even the states, the hilly states, Himalayan states, they are also following many of the technocentric methods of development. Like for example, in these areas there is increasing development of resort tourism, 5-star hotels, and when it is so, you can very clearly understand that there will be extra use of the resources which will be taking place, which will modify the ecology in the given area. So construction is taking place. Road construction, so roads basically what they will do, they will modify the slopes, they will undercut the slopes. Similarly, if you talk about several tunnels are being made, you know, Himachal Pradesh becomes very cold, frozen, particularly the interior part of the Himachal Pradesh. So tunnels are being made and blasting is taking place. There is hydro projects, very, very important cause this is. In fact, if you talk about NGT has also, National Green Tribunal has also talked about this problem in the Himalayan region. And what has happened? See, in 1985-86, can be considered as the watershed of Indian planning. From here, what happened? Our planning became more comparatively, I am saying, comparatively eco-friendly. It became more eco-friendly. Like for example, before this, our policy was to make big multi-purpose projects. After this, we decided that multi-purpose projects have more problems than they provide solutions. And thus what we did, we shifted towards, we thought smaller the better, because smaller things will be also community control. So essentially what happened, our focus now shifted to mini and micro dams. However, what has happened? there has been sanction of too many mini and micro dams, such projects. And if there is too many mini and micro dam, their combined influence is actually becoming more than a single multi-project purpose project would have otherwise caused the damages. So for example, think about this. Suppose there is a river, and if I make too many such mini micro dams on the river, tell me, can we say that will they interrupt the flow of water? Yes, they will interrupt the flow of water. And if they are interrupting the flow of water, there will be more storage of water. In fact, the chances of flooding will be high. And as a result of which, what will happen? As a result of which, there will be more chances of triggering of the landslides. So again, that is also one of the reasons, and no doubt, as I told you, in Himalayas, mining activities, particularly limestone mining, is a very, very dominant which is taking place. So that is also one of the factors. In fact, you know, in Himachal, there is also one more factor of plantation agriculture, where there is cutting and modification of the slopes taking place. Okay. So all of these factors are responsible for the increasing intensity of landslides which are taking place in the Himachal. ठीक है. So जब मैं इस आंसर को लिखूंगा तो मैं कैसे लिखूंगा? इसको मैं ऐसे लिखूंगा. I'll talk about the introduction में. I'll talk about the some of the facts जो अभी हमने पढ़े थे. How there is in the past 2 years there was increasing landslides taking place. So that fact I will be writing in the main body. My main body will have 2 parts, because it is talking about the why, cause. So when I am talking about the causes, I'll write main body में the anthropogenic causes. And if you talk about the anthropogenic causes, here I will give weightage of the main body to be 75%. Okay? But once I have written this, I will say that this anthropogenic factor is essentially what? Superimposed over the hazard proneness due to natural factors. Natural factors, which is the case of Himachal. और फिर मैं क्या करूंगा? एटलीस्ट वो सारे नेचुरल फैक्टर्स जो अभी हमने बात किए थे, वो सारे नेचुरल फैक्टर्स यहां पर एटलीस्ट लिस्ट कर दूंगा. एक्सप्लेन नहीं करूंगा, बट आई लिस्ट देम. ठीक है. So that means even natural factors I'll just write around 25% of the words for this also. So it is the combined influence of anthropogenic factors and these natural factors which has done what? Which has created a cascading effect which is leading to the greater intensity and frequency of landslides which are taking place in the Himalayas. Okay. So likewise, I'll write my main body, and in the conclusion I can definitely write about some remedial measures which we are going to talk about now. ठीक है. तो अगर मैं remedial measures की बात करूं तो landslide risk reduction, it has always 2 parts are there. One is the exposure reduction. Exposure reduction. And second, if you talk about, is the hazard reduction. You know very well, जब तक humans involved नहीं होंगे, like for example, when human beings are till not exposed to the hazard, there will be no disasters. ठीक है. Disaster is always, disaster की definition पता होगी तुम लोगों को. Disaster क्या होता है? Disaster is hazard into vulnerability upon capacity. This is what is disaster. ठीक है. सो हमें क्या करना पड़ेगा, हमें हजार्ड को मैनेज करना पड़ेगा, and we have to make sure that people are less exposed to this hazard because you cannot much do about it. So exposure reduction and hazard reduction should be done. अब exposure reduction की बात करें तो there are number of things which can be done, and this, if you talk about education and awareness of local population should be done. Then if you talk about geographical warnings should be identified, and the third thing is the response mechanism. ठीक है. अब देखो यहां पे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट क्या है, that when we are talking about exposure reduction, it is always here the strategy that we should adopt is we should follow a bottom up approach. ठीक है. सो you can understand. अब मैं थोड़ा सा explain करूं. Education and awareness of the local people. You can understand who will be the people who will first know about the signs of landslides. It will be the local people because they are present there and they are frequently present there. They can know if they know what are the problems. For example, suppose there is, suppose this is the structure in an area. एक structure है यहाँ पर और इस तरह का कुछ structures बने हुए हैं. Suppose you find that there is seepage, unusual seepage of water coming from here, which was not present earlier. Can I say इसका ज़रूर इसका ये मतलब हो सकता है कि ये जो लेयर है वो कैसी है, इम्परमिएबल लेयर है, और यहाँ पर क्या हो गया, there is collection of water has taken place, and if this is so, that means the chances of having landslides, it is very high. और सपोज करो कि यहाँ पर एक नदी बह रही थी, there was a river flowing or a small stream of water was flowing and something happened, there was a kind of obstruction which was created here. यहाँ पर एक obstruction आ गया due to which water is getting collected here. If people know that water, involvement of water is one of the factors which triggers landslides, can we say they can go and inform the officials who can take action, who can make sure that the drainage lines are restored? Okay, so education and awareness of the people, local population, it is very important when it comes to the exposure reduction or when it comes to landslide risk reduction. Similarly, if you talk about geographical warnings, and in India, if you talk about, it is the Geological Survey of India, GSI. And GSI is involved in monitoring of several sites in the high and medium vulnerability zones of the landslides. Okay, so there is constant monitoring of these sites is taking place so that such geographical warnings, जो अभी मैंने साइंस की बात की, they can be identified and steps can be taken. ठीक है. And obviously, definitely the response mechanism, which is, if you talk about the common phenomena in majority of the disaster management. So that is the exposure reduction part. Then if you talk about the second part is hazard reduction. So hazard reduction involves engineering elements. It involves other things like removal of elements of risk. So that is one. And also if you talk about the several type of several type of developmental activities, other developmental activities which can be taken up. So इंजीनियरिंग एलिमेंट्स में बेसिकली यहाँ पर हमारा कहने का मतलब है वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द हार्ड कोर इंजीनियरिंग मेथड्स, लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल मेकिंग ऑफ द रिटेनिंग वॉल्स को बना देना, दैट इज वन ऑफ द एग्जाम्पल ऑफ सच इंजीनियरिंग एलिमेंट्स. सो इफ वी नो दैट this is the area and suppose if we have cut the roads here, we have cut the slopes, we know that this slopes can get destabilized. So what we can do is we can make a retaining wall here and essentially we can know or we can protect this area. So using such engineering techniques is one of the ways in which hazard reduction can be done. Removal of the elements of risk, like for example, if we know that in an area there is problem of glacial lake outburst fear is there. So what we will do, we will make sure that the water is released so that the failure doesn't take place and such flash floods won't come which won't trigger landslides. डेवलपमेंटल एक्टिविटीज का मेरा यहाँ पर कहने का मतलब था आई कुड हैव एक्चुअली कवर्ड इट अंडर इंजीनियरिंग एलिमेंट्स इटसेल्फ, बट मैंने उसको अलग से लिख दिया बिकॉज यू नो आज के टाइम में क्या हो रहा है कि आप जितने नंबर ऑफ पॉइंट्स लिख रहे हो यू आर गेटिंग अकॉर्डिंगली द मार्क्स. ठीक है, सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट हियर देयर इज सॉफ्ट कोर इंजीनियरिंग टेक्निक्स, which is essentially if you talk about like revegetation of the area with suitable species of trees, okay, so that is basically hazard reduction. और अब मैं hazard reduction की बात करूं तो यहां पर क्या होता है, this activity actually requires lots of resources and funds. ठीक है, so this is essentially taken in what manner? It is more top down. It is based upon a more top down approach. ठीक है, so ideally exposure reduction should be domain of what? The local government, and hazard reduction should be domain of the central government and state government departments who are essentially working in the area of the concerned department. Okay, so that is how the landslide risk reduction is essentially done. ठीक है, इंडिया के कंटेक्स्ट में मैंने यहाँ पर कुछ और इसके ऊपर मटेरियल दे दिया है, so you can just go through that landslide management के ऊपर what has been done in India, and like GSI was made the nodal agency. So Geological Survey of India was given the responsibility of nodal agency for landslide hazard zonation. And the departments of Science of Technology and Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change were identified as nodal agencies for remaining two task force respectively. The GSI is the lead agency for landslide monitoring and mitigation. Landslide Hazard Atlas of India containing small scale maps was published jointly by Building Materials and Technology Promotion Council and Anna University in 2004. ठीक है, so there is some factual details which you should just go through, and macro जो मैं बताना था I have just informed you. अब लैंडस्लाइड से एक फिनोमेना जो रिलेटेड फिनोमेना रहा है, दैट इज द लैंड सिंकिंग विच इज टेकिंग प्लेस इन द जोशीमठ. ठीक है, सो अ क्वेश्चन कैन बी आस्क्ड related with this as well. So we know that in October 21, the cracks first appeared in few houses in Uttarakhand's Joshimath town. Over a year later, by January 2023, more than 11,000 houses have developed major or minor cracks on the floors, ceilings, and walls. Beams had been dislodged in many houses. So, this is the problem, that there is a very fast sinking of land which was taking place. Okay? So, it was located at a height of around 6,000 feet, and it is located on the Rishikesh Badrinath National Highway in Chamoli district of Uttarakhand. It has population of only 23,000, but the thing is, because it has become a tourist site and it is on the way of the tourist places like Char Dham, etc. So what has happened? This area has experienced heavy construction. So there are a number of hotels, resorts, and markets which are there for the tourists, pilgrims, trekkers, and also there are personals of army and the ITBP. So this is what we are talking about. Here you can see this is basically the Joshimath, and this is the Joshimath road coming from Hilang. And if you talk about here, there is NTPC Tapovan's Vishnugad Hydel project which is being constructed. Okay, so we'll see that all of these have been implicated as one of the reasons for the cause of this land sinking. So isko main thoda sa pehle bata deta hu, then we'll just go through it. So if you talk about the Joshimath land sinking, we can definitely say it is result of what? It is a result of a combination of natural and human made factors. Of natural and human made factors. Okay, so if we talk about first, इसकी बात करते हैं natural. How? What are the natural reasons for this? So देखो, you might have seen if you go in the Himalayan regions or hilly regions, this is the kind of situation. There is a hill slope which is found, and इस hill slope में क्या हो रहा है? There is weathering, breaking of rocks in situ. So weathering is taking place. Now debris which is formed, this debris will fall down and it will get collected here, and this debris will keep on getting collected over a period of time, and this will lead to formation of debris slope. This debris can also be collected because of certain landslide events which can occur. So in case of Joshimath, actually it is located on the hill slope, and this hill slope was actually a debris slope. Okay? If the debris slope remains undisturbed for long period of time, naturally what will happen? कि इसमें there will be the phenomena of vegetation growth. ठीक है? And as a result of this vegetation growth, there will be stabilization of the slope taking place. So naturally what has happened, all these phenomena which occurred before humans began to interfere in this area, there was stabilization of this debris slope. So if you talk about Joshimath, kahan par located hai? It is located over this kind of stabilized debris slope. This debris was accumulated by a landslide which occurred in the past. Okay? So I hope this is clear. So no matter it got stabilized, but still, despite this stabilization, we can one thing very clearly say, it is not made up of hard rocks. It is made up of what? It is made up of accumulated rocks, accumulated, more better word is accumulated debris. And debris कैसे बना होता है? Debris is essentially made up of large and small size. If you talk about material, like there might be presence of cobbles, pebbles, and finer materials like sand. So all these have accumulated to create such a debris slope, and over this the Joshi Math has been created. Okay. So way back, actually even much before this problem was identified, actually it was, this problem of land sinking was even seen in the past. Okay. So there was in fact a committee formed, you can see MC Mishra committee, to look into this problem of land sinking which was taking place in the Joshimath region. So the committee gave its report in 1976, and it very clearly warned against heavy and unscientific construction in the town. Unfortunately, the advice of the committee, like most of the committees that we frame, was not taken into account, and the construction activities continued unhindered. ठीक है. So देखो होता क्या है, अब इसमें मैं बताता हूं कि प्रॉब्लम क्या है. नाउ दिस इज अ डेब्रिस स्लोप, एंड हियर व्हाट इज द केस कि कैसे स्टेबलाइजेशन हुआ. इसमें डिफरेंट साइज के, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट, ये मटेरियल्स बने होंगे और वो आपस में दे गॉट इंटरलॉक्ड. ओके. एंड हियर देयर इज ऑल्सो फाइनर मटेरियल लाइक सैंड एटसेट्रा. ये सब इंटरलॉकिंग हो गई इसमें. नाउ थिंक अबाउट दिस. इफ सपोज देयर इज, if we construct, for example, here a town where we are constructing buildings, or where we are constructing roads, heavy roads are there, there is lots of traffic movement taking place in this area, what will happen? Can I say it would put pressure? These big boulders which will be there, they will put pressure on these pores. तो जैसे ऐसा होता है ना कि अगर सपोज करो कि देयर इज अ वेट मटेरियल, मिट्टी है, अगर मैं उसको निचोड़ूं तो क्या होगा? पानी निकल जाएगा. ठीक है. सो सेम थिंग, दीज बोल्डर्स आर डूइंग व्हाट? दे आर पुटिंग लॉट्स ऑफ प्रेशर ऑन दीज पोर्स, एंड बेसिकली व्हाट विल हैपन, एज अ रिजल्ट द वाटर विल गो आउट, इट विल बी एक्सपेल्ड आउट. And as this water is being expelled out, can we say it is possible that this water will also carry this finer particle with it? और जो spaces हैं धीरे धीरे क्या होने लगेंगे? These spaces will become slowly more and more empty, and that means there will be further readjustment taking place. So this is essentially the cause of land sinking, the primary cause of land sinking which is taking place in the Joshimath region. So what is there in Joshimath? There are a number of other factors. One is this heavy construction activities which are taking place. Beside, there is construction of one of the tunnels which is there, and the Vishnugar Tapovan, if you talk about hydel project, there is accumulation of water also being done. And you can understand, if water again enters in these pores, as we said, this phenomena will be further magnified. This water will be expelled out, and as it expels out, it will also carry with itself finer material. Okay? Due to which the pores will keep on becoming more and more empty. ठीक है. इसीलिए एक जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी में, अप्लाइड जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी में हम पढ़ते हैं कि when you are constructing highways, for example, where there is, we know that heavy traffics will be passing through them, the terrain over which they will be built is very important and have to be taken into account. So you have to make sure, like for example, in many areas there might be areas where they not maybe stable, like for example lake areas where there was filling done, but there is a possibility that when there is pressure from above, from that lakes, as water goes out, it will carry lots of finer particle, and again there will be collapse of those highways. So similar kind of phenomena is taking place in the Joshimath case. So this is the physical phenomena, and why it has been accelerated. So जैसा कि मैंने बताया, role of geological features, first factor, geological features. Then if you talk about, there is the role of NTPC Hydel project, the Tapovan Vishnugarh power plant, which is being constructed on Dhauli Ganga river in this Chamoli district. The project was damaged after a glacial burst had triggered flash floods in Rishi Ganga and Dhauli Ganga rivers in February 2021. On December 24, 2009, a tunnel boring machine punctured an aquifer some 3 kilometers from the Silang village, which is only about 5 kilometers from the Joshimath. The punctured released water of about this much of water, 7 to 800 liter per second water was flowing. Okay. And as we have seen, this water will essentially go where? It will go in the pores which are present. And next, the phenomena that we talked about will be taking place. So, this is the case. Then, third, if you talk about the role of the Char Dham project, the 6 kilometer long Auli bypass is being built by the BRO. And if you talk about, it is also being scrutinized because of it is leading to weakening of slopes, and it is further destabilizing the local topography. It was saying that it led to shaking of the base of the buildings, and the bypass is part of the 825 kilometer Char Dham highway expansion project which is taking place. It has led to unscientific slope cutting in the area, which has resulted in several landslides. So Naveen Juwal, a geologist, was a former member of high-powered committee that Supreme Court appointed to review the project. He had recommended that bypass be built only after a geotechnical feasibility study. Unfortunately, it was not done. And today we find that this is also one of the reasons, as we said, which is leading to this problem. जैसा कि और बताया मैंने, वाटर का रोल डेफिनेटली होगा. तो रोल ऑफ इनएडिक्वेट ड्रेनेज एंड वेस्ट वाटर डिस्पोजल. So it was found that in the Joshimath region, almost 85% of the buildings in the town, including those which are owned by the government, they are not connected with any sewerage system. And what they have presence of soak pits instead. So ये soak pits क्या कर रही हैं? These soak pits, water is going infiltrating down, and it is reaching in those pore spaces in this slope region. And when the pressure from above will be increasing, that water will be expelled out. And as this water is expelling out, it is carrying with it finer material also, which is creating more open spaces within the rocks. And thus the rocks are adjusting, and this sinking is essentially taking place. Okay? So that is the case of, if you talk about the cause of this land sinking. So what is the way forward? क्या क्या कर सकते हैं? Balancing environment and development. We have to ensure the Mishra committee report should have been respected. We didn't do, but at least now we can try to do that. A development strategy for the Himalayas should not come at the cost of the environment. We have to take more eco-centric approach towards development in the Himalayan region. So rather it should be based on region's natural resources such as forest, water, biodiversity, and very important ecotourism. Question is, why we are developing a type of tourism which is resort-based tourism. Resort-based tourism will always benefit whom? It will benefit rich people, investors who are not even living in the area. It is an area which is more fragile. Here, For example, we should support more homestay tourism. In fact, if we are adopting such eco-tourist activities, what will happen? The income will actually it will be going down to the local people, which will be very beneficial for the area. So we should adopt a more, we can say, eco-centric approach in development of economic development in this area. Then region specific infrastructure. So local energy supply should be created. Like for example, if you talk about this area receives good amount of sunlight, there's good, if you talk about availability of wind speeds are found. So again, you can develop such kind of renewable energy should be focused upon, rather than if you talk about developing hydel power projects. Okay. So that is another thing which can be done. So focus should be on small projects rather than building the massive dams. Utilization of the traditional wisdom of the people. People should use traditional knowledge. इसको बोलते हैं हम TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, agricultural practices, construction practices, and local cultural aspects for human well-being. If you go in the Himalayan region, this traditional knowledge is well established that you have to make sure that the drainage lines are maintained, because people know, the local people know that if you don't maintain the drainage lines, ultimately what will happen? There will be the problem of storage of water, infiltration of water, and in future this will further destabilize the slopes. ठीक है. But Joshimath, as we said, ये तो एक city है जो कि बाद में it has been settled, and यहाँ पर जो लोग आए हैं वो कौन है? Urban people mostly. ठीक है. So this generation does not has that kind of traditional ecological knowledge which will be generally more present in the village areas. So we have to make sure, we have to make them aware of it, and definitely we have to use the engineering methods to make sure that the role of pore pressure, जो pore pressure अभी मैं बात कर रहा था, in determining the slope stability needs to be studied further in this region. ठीक है. So all these steps are the way forward to make sure that this problem further doesn't accelerates. Okay, so that is the topic of landslides and land subsidence. Definitely I believe that there is high probability of this question being asked. ठीक है. So today आज के लिए बंद करते हैं फ्रेंड्स. नेक्स्ट क्लास में हम इसको कंटिन्यू करेंगे, एंड यू कैन सी दैट कि द वे आई विल बी डूइंग एंड कवरिंग द टॉपिक्स 100% है कि इसमें से 3-4 क्वेश्चन फंसने हैं, 2-3 क्वेश्चन तो फंसेंगे ही फंसेंगे. ठीक है, क्योंकि करंट अफेयर बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस आते हैं और करंट अफेयर्स हम छोड़ेंगे नहीं. ठीक है, इससे रिलेटेड, और हम उसका ट्रेडिशनल पार्ट भी करेंगे, सो दैट कि अगर ट्रेडिशनल क्वेश्चंस आते हैं तो वी आर ऑल्सो वेल रिवाइज्ड विद रिस्पेक्ट टू दैट, एंड वी आर इन अ पोजीशन टू राइट इट. ठीक है. सो टिल द नेक्स्ट क्लास विच विल बी ऑन आई थिंक नेक्स्ट alternate days पे, तो इट इज विल बी ऑन थर्सडे. Goodbye, take care, and we'll meet on Thursday.